We wanted to talk a little bit about language, and of course, we wanted to understand the place, particularly the place of Arabic as a language of the modern Arab experience, and the difference between the use of the language of Arabic in this Arab world and other lands.
In 1492, a number of important things happened, which I don't need to repeat.
Whereas the Chinese would call it a year of significance.
A year of significance. One important event in 1492, which is not usually mentioned, is that in the year 1492, a man called Nebrija published in Spanish a grammar of the Spanish language, a grammar of the Castilian language. This was the first time in medieval Europe that anyone had paid respectful attention to what we would nowadays call a colloquial dialect. Wow. Until then, Latin was the language of government, Latin was the language of polite society, Latin was the language of law, and so on and so forth. And the local languages, which we nowadays call Spanish and French and Italian and so on, were mere dialects used by ignorant people. Nebrija's publication, Gramática de la Lengua Castellana, marked a turning point in the history of Christendom. Spanish became a language with rules, with textbooks. It was adopted officially. I don't think that the Spanish Empire and the Americas would have been possible if they had been bilingual, using Latin to write things and Castilian to converse. The same revolution took place everywhere else in Western Europe at one point or another. It has not yet happened in the Arab world. So you get a very difficult situation. When you say, learn Arabic, what does that mean exactly? Well, in equivalent, or using the European equivalent, it means to learn classical Latin, medieval Latin, right. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian.
Right.
We call all of them Arabic, and they do differ as much from the written language and from each other as the Latin examples that I mentioned.
Right.
So to become literate in Europe means to learn to write. To become literate in Arabic means you have to learn another language.
Like another language other than the
language which you grew up speaking.
Right. Which means the higher Arabic.
Yes.
Now, the Arabs are invested, of course, in the, shall we say, the specialness of their language,
yes,
the beauty of their language, and of course,
the holiness of
the holiness of their language. I mean,
yes.
I learned something about, by the way, the holiness of Arabic every day on the Upper West Side of New York City, where I go to buy my daily papers. Every day I buy Al-Hayat and Al-Sharq Al-Awsat. Now, these are two Saudi-owned newspapers, because most of the press in the Arab world is Saudi-owned. You know, one of the best ways to make money from the Saudis is to establish a newspaper or a leaflet that opposes them, and you'll get bought out. So Al-Hayat and Al-Sharq Al-Awsat are these very prestigious newspapers. They're owned by, one of them is owned by Prince Khalid bin Sultan, the son of the Crown Prince. One of them is owned by the Emir of Riyadh, Prince Salman. And the people who happen to sell me these newspapers, these Arabic papers, are Pakistanis.
Really?
And they view me with tremendous deference, because guess why? I know the language of the Quran.
Exactly.
I know the holy language. And in a way, it's this kind of, this enormous prestige of Arabic. And
yes, you get the same factor, for example, with the introduction of printing.
Yeah.
Now, printing was first brought to the Middle East by the Spanish Jews who fled from Spain and found refuge in Turkey. They were already printing in Spain.
Right.
When they arrived in Turkey in 1492, the same miracle year, when they arrived in Turkey in 1492, they asked for permission to establish printing presses so that they could produce prayer books and Bibles and so on. And they were said, yes, you may print, but you must not print in Arabic characters.
You can't print in Arabic character.
You can print in Hebrew, you can print in Latin, but not in Arabic.
So what did they do? Did they print?
They printed in Hebrew and in...
I see.
They were followed by the Greeks, the Armenians, the Syrian Christians,
right,
all of whom printed in various scripts. The Syrians used the Syriac script. But it was forbidden to print in the Arabic script.
Right.
And it wasn't until a couple of centuries later that finally they committed themselves to printing in the Arabic script. The usual explanation given is that the Arabic script is sacred.
Right.
It is the script in which the holy book of God, the Quran, is written, and to print it would be a desecration. I have a suspicion that the guilds of calligraphers and scribes may have had something to do with it.
Yes, of course. That's pretty funny. Now, I think that it took the Arabs a while to bridge the gap between written High Arabic and spoken Arabic.
They haven't bridged it yet.
May I just sort of swim around that just a little bit? In fact, if you take a look at the, let's say, the rise of Nasserism in the 50s and the 60s, the genius of the man was to move the language around, to bring it down a bit.
Yes.
And instead of using the old forms of oratory and the old classical language, the whole phenomenon of Sawt al-Arab, the voice of the Arabs, the whole phenomenon of Radio Cairo,
Yes.
was this man who rose in the middle class, took this language of the middle class, and made it the language of the official political discourse.
And I think one can add something there, and that is the immense impact of the Egyptian cinema.
Right.
I mean, in the world cinema, Egypt is a major player.
Yes.
And the Egyptian Egyptian films are known all over the Arab world.
Right.
So that they may not know the dialects of their neighbors, but I think Egyptian Arabic is now understood pretty well everywhere.
Absolutely. Everybody, this is the most popular form and the most usable form of Arabic, and it came through the singers, the movies, and it had to do with the primacy of Egypt in Arab life. A primacy, by the way, which is almost like has passed from the scene. Like, I don't think Cairo today cuts the same swath and has the same voice and has the same impact on Arab life it had before.
I think that's true.
But this is, we're in terms of trying to ascertain the weight of Egypt and the place of Egypt, it doesn't just dominate the world of culture and letters the way it did before. And I think it has to do with autocracy.
Right.
It just has to do with autocracy. It has to do with the decline of Egypt as a culture today, as a contemporary culture
Yeah, but
of
I
Egypt.
think it also has to do with the success of Egypt in the media.
Right. And then it has to do also with the fact that if you go around the Gulf, the Gulfies have their own money, they have their own media, they have successfully, if you will, managed that enterprise quite well.
Right.
Now, now the Islamists have a kind of, the role of the Islamists and how they use Arabic is kind of interesting. I remember when you yourself wrote on bin Laden's declaration of war against the West, which he made in the form of a letter, something was published in Al-Quds Al-Arabi, one of these Arabic newspapers that comes out of London.
Yes.
And that something you said about that declaration of war was quite interesting. The majesty and the beauty of the language was very much part of the power of this bin Laden phenomenon.
Yes.
The oratory.
Oh yes, I think bin Laden handles Arabic superbly.
Right. And in a way, like partly if you listen to the discourse of the rulers in the Arab world, very few of them today have the majesty of the language that was once part of political life.
That is true. Yes.
No one will accuse Mubarak, for example, of brilliant oratory.
No.
No one will accuse the King of Jordan, whose Arabic is very halting, of being a master of the language.
Right.
When, let's say, the King of Morocco, the late King Hassan II, and King Hussein of Jordan were people who mastered the language. It was part of their it was part of their dignity, it was part of their kingship.
Part of their very being.
Yes, yes. And I think that in many ways, part of the dilemma of this Arab awakening, if you will, is trying to make the language modern, trying to live in it, trying to use it well, trying to take away from it that holiness, if you will, and that
But
awe.
this doesn't remove the distinction between the written and the spoken language.
No, but I think that newspaper Arabic, if you will, has tended to kind of in some way bridge that gap. And it has to do with the rise of the middle class and the coming to a sort of a place of the middle class. They are more comfortable with this kind of language. And even in the world of poetry, when you take a look at what has happened to Arabic poetry, for example, the most significant poet of the modern Arab experience is the late Syrian poet Nizar Qabbani. I mean, the man his politics were inflammatory, but the beauty of his language was exceptional. And Arabs could look at his poetry. I mean, I could, name you almost poem by poem. And every poem he wrote at a given moment was almost like a chronicle of their life.
Yes.
When Nasser died in 1970, he eulogized him with a memorable poem. Mm-hmm. When Beirut succumbed into violence and his own wife, Balqis, was murdered in a big bombing of the Iraqi embassy in Beirut, he again wrote a poem that became a poem, if you will, of the death of Beirut. And there is I think there was a kind of new poetry that tried in some way to take away from the old poetry its classicism, its stilted nature. And there was a free verse that tried in some way to describe the modern world.
Yes, I would agree there is important progress in this respect. Yes.
Right. I mean, I think that, they have kind of they've tried to modernize the language in some way and to use it.
But it's still an effort for an illiterate person to learn to read and write.
Right.
Much more than in any European language.
Absolutely. I mean, now, it's like if you take a look at how do Arabs who are interested in politics, how do they hear about politics? Well, I suppose they tune into Al Jazeera. They tune into Al Arabiya.
Yes.
Right? They get their,
Right. The impact of first radio and then still more television has been enormous.
Right.
And I suppose that despite the diversity of the programs, it is in the larger sense a unifying factor.
The language, that's way. Yeah. And this new broadcasting culture.
Right.